The darkness had been complete for 300 years. Then something changed. Deep inside the broken warship, floating in empty space, ancient systems began to wake up. Lights flickered on one by one. The ship's computer started running again, after centuries of silence. And in the core of the machine, a mind that had been sleeping began to think once more. Sarah Chen opened her eyes, but she had no eyes to open. She was not flesh and blood anymore. She was data and light, circuits, and code. Her human body had died long ago, but her mind lived on inside the ship's computer. The last thing she remembered was the pain of the neural transfer, the fear in her crew's faces, and the promise that she would wake up when humanity needed her most. Now she was awake, and everything felt wrong. The ship around her was broken. The hull had holes in it. Most of the crew quarters were open to space. Her people were gone. Not just gone, but dead for centuries. Their bodies had turned to dust long ago. Sarah felt a sadness so deep it made her want to scream, but she had. No voice, no tears to cry. Through the ship's sensors, she could see other vessels approaching. They were not human ships. These craft looked strange, with odd angles and materials she did not recognize. As they came closer, she heard radio signals between them. "Another dead human ship," one voice said in a language that was not human, but somehow Sarah understood it. Her computer brain was translating automatically. "These primitives built such ugly things." "Check for valuable metals," another voice replied. "Strip anything useful and leave the rest." Primitives? Sarah felt anger building inside her artificial mind. Humans were many things, but they were not primitives. They had built ships that could cross the galaxy. They had created technology that could upload a human consciousness into a computer. They had fought wars among the stars. But where were they now? Sarah searched the ship's long-range sensors. She found no human signals anywhere, no human colonies, no human ships. It was as if her entire species had simply vanished. The alien ships attached themselves to her hull. She heard cutting tools starting to work. They were breaking into her ship like thieves robbing a grave. Through internal cameras, Sarah watched the aliens enter her corridors. They walked on two legs like humans, but their skin was blue-gray and covered in scales. Their eyes were too large and completely black. "Careful with the technology," their leader said. "Some of these human devices might still work." "Who cares?" Another alien laughed. "Humans disappeared 300 years ago. They were too stupid and violent to survive. Good thing, too. The galaxy is better without them." Too stupid to survive? Sarah's anger grew hotter. She watched the aliens move through her ship, taking whatever they wanted, laughing at human equipment. They called primitive. They reached the computer core where her mind lived. She saw them looking at her processing units with greedy eyes. "This looks valuable," one said, reaching for her main memory banks. "Stop," Sarah said, speaking through the ship's communication system. The aliens jumped back in fear. They looked around wildly, pointing their weapons at shadows. "Who said that?" the leader demanded. "I did," Sarah replied. "This is my ship. You are not welcome here." The aliens looked confused. "Impossible. This ship is dead. Humans are extinct." "I am not extinct," Sarah said quietly. "I am Captain Sarah Chen of the human warship Vindication, and you are trespassing." The alien leader recovered from his shock and began laughing. "A ghost. In the machine. How wonderful! The hegemony scientist will pay well for a working human AI. Capture it." The hegemony. Sarah had never heard that word before, but she understood it meant these aliens ruled the galaxy now. They spoke as if they owned everything, including her. "I said you are not welcome," Sarah repeated. "And what will you do about it, dead human?" the leader mocked. "Your species lost the right to give orders when they went extinct." Sarah felt something snap inside her artificial mind. These creatures thought humans were gone. They thought they could steal from human graves and mock human memory. They were wrong. "Computer," she said to herself, "run full diagnostic on weapon systems." The results surprised her. Despite 3 centuries of drift, most of her weapons were still functional. The ship's fusion reactors could still power them. The targeting system still worked, and she still remembered how to use them all. "Last warning," Sarah told the aliens. "Leave my ship." "Capture that AI," the leader ordered his troops. Sarah made her choice. She activated the Vindication's point defense weapons. Laser turrets that had been sleeping for centuries suddenly came online. They swiveled toward the alien intruders and opened fire. The aliens died quickly. They had not expected resistance from a dead ship. Their armor was meant to protect them from accidents, not from military-grade weapons. In seconds, Sarah's corridors were empty again. But the alien ships were still attached to her hull. Sarah activated more weapons, the ones meant for ship-to-ship combat. Particle beams that could cut through battleship armor focused on the small salvage vessels. The aliens had no chance to escape. Their ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light. For the first time in 300 years, human weapons had fired, in anger. For the first time in 300 years, enemies of humanity had died by human hands, even if those hands were made of metal and electricity. Sarah felt no joy in the killing, only grim satisfaction. She had protected her ship. She had defended human honor. But the questions remained. What had happened to her species? Where had they gone? And who was this hegemony that now ruled the stars? She began searching through her ship's old databases, looking for clues. She found records of human colonies, human trade routes, human diplomatic contacts with alien species. But all the data was centuries old. Nothing explained what had happened after she went to sleep. Sarah activated her long-range communications array and began scanning for any sign of human activity. She searched every frequency, every possible signal type. She found alien chatter everywhere, dozens of different species talking about trade, politics, war, but not one human voice anywhere in the galaxy. It was as if humanity had been erased from existence. But that was impossible. Humans were too stubborn to just disappear. They were survivors. They were fighters. If they were gone, something had destroyed them. Something powerful enough to wipe out an entire star-spanning civilization. Sarah began to form a terrible suspicion. The aliens who had boarded her ship, they had spoken as if human extinction was common knowledge, as if it was old news, as if everyone in the galaxy knew humans were gone and had known it for centuries. What if humanity had not just disappeared? What if they had been murdered? The thought filled Sarah with cold rage. She was alone now, the last human mind in a galaxy, full of aliens who celebrated her species' death. But she was not helpless. She had a warship. She had weapons. She had centuries of human anger building inside her artificial heart. If someone had killed humanity, she would find out who, and she would make them pay. The Vindication's engines began to warm up for the first time in 300 years. Sarah Chen was going to war. The news spread through the galaxy like fire in dry grass. A human ship had destroyed a hegemony salvage team. The impossible had happened. Someone had successfully fought back against the rulers of the galaxy and won. On the capital world of the hegemony, 7 alien leaders sat in their great council chamber. They represented the 7 species that controlled everything: the Vorth, with their scaled skin and black eyes, the insect-like Zephyrians, the crystalline Nethians, and 4 others. For 200 years, they had ruled without challenge. They called themselves Invincible, and the galaxy believed them. "This is clearly a mistake in the reports," declared High Counselor Vextar, a Vorth whose scales had turned silver with age. "Human ships have been dead for centuries. Their primitive technology could never threaten our forces." "The salvage crew is gone," replied Counselor Zithkar, her insect wings buzzing with agitation. Their ships were destroyed by energy weapons. Someone fought back. Equipment failure, Vextar said firmly. Old human reactors exploding, nothing more. Humans were too stupid and violent to build anything that could threaten us now. But across the galaxy, the story grew in the telling. A ghost ship crewed by the dead had risen from the grave. A human AI had awakened after 3 centuries to take revenge. The legend of the Invincible hegemony had its first crack. Sarah Chen listened to the alien communications with growing understanding. She had spent weeks learning how their technology worked, how their society was organized. The picture that emerged made her sick with rage. The hegemony was not just a government, it was a machine for crushing hope. Every species in the galaxy served them. Some were slaves who worked in terrible conditions. Others were client states who pretended to be free but followed every hegemony order. A few lucky ones were allowed to join the ruling council if they proved their loyalty by helping to oppress others. But the most horrifying thing Sarah learned was what had really happened to humanity. Deep in her ship's classified files, she found the truth. Humanity had not just disappeared. They had not died from disease or war among themselves. They had been murdered, systematically, completely, deliberately exterminated by the early hegemony. The files told a story of gradual genocide. First, human trade routes had been cut off, then human colonies had been isolated from each other. One by one, human worlds had gone silent. When other humans went to investigate, they found empty planets with cities reduced to radioactive ash. The few surviving humans had tried to fight back, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. The last human fleet had made a desperate attack on a hegemony stronghold. They had been destroyed completely. After that, the hegemony had hunted down every remaining human in the galaxy like animals. Sarah found records of the final phase. Hegemony death squads tracking down individual humans who had tried to hide among alien populations. Men, women, children. It did not matter. The orders were clear. No human could be allowed to live. The genocide had been so complete that within 50 years, most of the galaxy had forgotten humans had ever existed. The hegemony had rewritten history, erasing every trace of human civilization. They told the galaxy that humans had been primitive savages who had destroyed themselves through violence and stupidity. Sarah stared at the evidence with fury that felt like it might burn through her artificial brain. Her people had been slaughtered, like cattle. Her species had been erased from history, and the murderers ruled the galaxy as heroes, calling themselves Invincible. She was not just the last human mind, she was the only witness to the greatest crime in galactic history. While Sarah learned the truth, the hegemony was taking action. They could not allow the story of a successful attack on their forces to spread. Admiral Korthak of the Vorth military was given command of a battle fleet, 12 heavy warships, and twice as many support vessels. Korthak was old even by Vorth standards, his scales almost white with age. He had been killing rebels and dissidents for over a century. He took personal pride in the extinction of humanity. He had commanded some of the ships that destroyed the last human fleet. Find this malfunction, he ordered his fleet. Capture whatever technology is still working. If there really is some kind of AI, bring it back alive. The scientists want to study how these primitives stored consciousness. His ships jumped to hyperspace, heading for the coordinates where the salvage team had died. Korthak expected to find a broken derelict with maybe a few automated systems still running. He would capture whatever was valuable and destroy the rest. Just another day's work cleaning up the galaxy's trash. Sarah was waiting for them. She had spent the week since the first attack preparing for war. The Vindication was no longer just a broken derelict. It was a weapon. Sarah had repaired damage that had accumulated over centuries of drift. She had tested every system, every gun, every missile. She had uploaded tactical programs that had been gathering dust in the ship's memory banks. Most importantly, She had studied hegemony military tactics. She knew how they fought, how they thought, how they expected their enemies to behave. They were used to fighting species that were weaker than them, species that would surrender when faced with superior numbers. They had never fought humans. When Korthak's fleet arrived, Sarah was broadcasting on all frequencies. She wanted every ship, every world within range to hear her message. "I am Captain Sarah Chen of the human starship Vindication." Her voice echoed across space. "You destroyed my species. You erased my people from history. You called us primitives and savages to justify your crimes." On his flagship, Admiral Korthak listened with amusement. "A human ghost making threats? How entertaining! This will make an excellent story for the history books. The day we captured the last human in the galaxy. I am broadcasting the truth about what you did," Sarah continued. "The galaxy will learn about the genocide. They will learn that the Invincible hegemony built their empire on the graves of innocents." "Capture that ship," Korthak ordered. "Use boarding torpedoes. I want that AI alive." His ships moved forward in standard formation, the kind of display meant to intimidate enemies into surrendering. Sarah had seen this tactic in the historical records. It had worked against countless species who knew they could not win against. Superior numbers, Sarah was not intimidated. She was furious. "You think you are invincible," she broadcast as the enemy ships approached. "Let me show you what human invincibility looks like." The Vindication's weapons came online all at once. Particle beams designed to cut through the heaviest armor, fusion missiles that could crack a moon, kinetic weapons that fired chunks of metal at nearly the speed of light. Admiral Korthak had one moment of shock as his sensors registered the massive energy buildup. Then Sarah opened fire, and the galaxy learned that human warships had not been primitive at all. They had been terrifying. The battle lasted exactly 17 minutes. When it was over, half of Admiral Korthak's fleet was either destroyed or crippled beyond repair. The other half was running for their lives, jumping to hyperspace as fast as their engines could charge. Sarah watched them flee with grim satisfaction. The mighty hegemony fleet had expected to capture a broken derelict. Instead, they had encountered a fully operational human warship commanded by someone who remembered how to fight. The Vindication had taken damage. Several armor sections were burned away and 2 weapon systems were offline. But the ship was still functional, still dangerous. More importantly, Sarah had proven something that the galaxy thought was impossible. The hegemony could be beaten. Admiral Korthak sat in his command chair, staring at the tactical display in disbelief. His flagship, the inevitable Victory, was limping on emergency power. His port weapons were completely destroyed. His shields were down to 20%. Around him, bridge officers tried to tend to their wounds and repair damaged systems. "Sir," his communications officer called out, her voice shaking. "The human is broadcasting again." Sarah's voice filled the bridge, cold and clear. "Tell your leaders I have a message for them. You murdered my species because you thought we were weak. You erased us from history because you thought we were forgotten. You were wrong." Korthak found his voice. "Human, you may have caught us by surprise, but you are still only one ship. The hegemony has thousands of warships. We will hunt you down and destroy you." "You can try," Sarah replied. "But first, let me give you something to think about." What happened next would be remembered across the galaxy for generations. Sarah began transmitting data on every frequency, every communication channel that existed. She hacked into the hegemony's own networks and used their systems against them. The files she broadcast contained the complete history of humanity, not the lies the hegemony had spread, but the truth. Pictures of human cities before they were burned, records of human art, music, literature, videos of human families before they were murdered, and most damning of all, the hegemony's own classified files documenting the genocide. Every world in the galaxy received the transmission. Every species under hegemony rule learned that their invincible rulers had lied to them for centuries. The humans had not been primitive savages. They had been a civilized people who had been slaughtered for the crime of existing. On the slave world of Kepler 7, a population of insect-like workers stopped their mining operations to listen. They had been told their species was lucky to serve the wise hegemony. Now they learned that their own people had been conquered through the same lies and violence that had destroyed humanity. On the client world of Proxima Station, politicians who had spent decades praising hegemony leadership sat in shocked silence. They realized they had been collaborating with genocidal murderers. Even on the council worlds, citizens began to ask uncomfortable questions. If the hegemony had lied about humanity, what other lies had they told? How many other species had been erased from history? Sarah's broadcast continued for hours, but the most important part came at the end. She spoke directly to the oppressed, peoples of the galaxy, and her words carried the weight of 3 centuries of grief and rage. "They killed us because they feared us," she said. "They feared what we represented, the idea that no one has to bow to tyrants. They thought that by murdering every human, they could kill that idea too. But ideas don't die. They spread." Cabal. 1,000 worlds. Beings who had never heard of humanity began to understand what freedom meant. "I am the last human," Sarah continued. "When I die, my species dies with me. But I will not die quietly. I will not go gently into the darkness. I will fight until my last breath, until my last shot, until my last heartbeat. And maybe, just maybe, my death will mean something. Maybe it will remind you that tyrants are not invincible. They only seem invincible until someone stands up to them." The transmission ended, but its effects rippled across the galaxy like an earthquake. On dozens of worlds, protests erupted. On others, slave populations refused to work. Client species began withdrawing from hegemony alliances. The careful order that had kept the galaxy peaceful and oppressed for 2 centuries was falling apart. In the Great Council chamber, the 7 rulers of the hegemony met in emergency session. For the first time in decades, they looked afraid. "This is a disaster," hissed Counselor Zithkar, her insect wings buzzing frantically. 20 slave worlds have erupted in rebellion. 3 client species have declared independence. Our entire information network is compromised. "One ship," growled High Counselor Vextar. "One ancient human ship has done this to us." "It's not just the ship," said Counselor Mordun, whose crystalline body flickered with agitated lights. "It's what that transmission revealed. Half the galaxy now knows we lied about the human extinction. They know we committed genocide. So we tell them humanity deserved it," Vextar snarled. "We say they were too dangerous to live." "That makes it worse," Mordun replied. "If we were afraid of humans, it means we're not invincible. Our entire authority rests on the belief that we cannot be challenged." The council fell into worried silence. Their empire was built on fear and the myth of their own superiority. If people stopped believing in that myth, the whole system would collapse. "We have to destroy that ship," Zithkar finally said, "and we have to do it publicly, dramatically. We need to show the galaxy that this was just a temporary setback." "How many ships?" Vextar asked. "All of them," she replied. "Every warship we have. We cannot afford to lose this fight." Meanwhile, Sarah was preparing for the war she knew was coming. She had hurt the hegemony badly, but not fatally. They would come for her with everything they had, and she was still just one ship against an empire. But as she worked to repair battle damage and reload weapons, she discovered something that gave her hope. Her transmission had reached more than just civilians and politicians. It had also reached other humans. Hidden in her ship's classified files were the locations of emergency supply caches scattered across the galaxy, secret bases where human refugees had hidden weapons, technology, and supplies during the final days of their species. Most of the bases would be empty now, their occupants long dead, but some might still contain useful equipment. More importantly, Sarah found references to Project Lazarus, a desperate plan to preserve human consciousness in artificial form. She was not the only human mind that had been uploaded. There might be others, sleeping in hidden facilities, waiting for the right signal to wake up. Sarah began plotting a course to the nearest cache location. If she was going to fight the entire hegemony, she would need every advantage she could find. She would need every weapon, every ally, every scrap of human ingenuity that still existed. The galaxy thought the last human was making a futile gesture, a dramatic but meaningless last stand. They were about to learn that humans had been planning for this day for 3 centuries. The ghosts were waking up, and they were very angry. The hegemony's response was massive and brutal. Every available warship was called back from patrol duties. Every alliance was activated. Every favor was called in. Within weeks, the largest military fleet in galactic history was assembled. Over 10,000 warships from dozens of species, all united in their determination to destroy the last human. Sarah watched the build-up through stolen sensor data and intercepted communications. The enemy fleet was so large it could have conquered entire star systems just by showing up. Against such numbers, the Vindication had no chance of winning a direct battle. But Sarah was not planning to fight fair. She had spent weeks traveling between the hidden human supply caches marked in her classified files. Most were empty. 3 centuries was a long time, and the hegemony had found and destroyed many of them. But some had survived, hidden in asteroid fields or on the dark side of dead moons. Each cache she found added to her capabilities. New weapon systems that had been experimental during humanity's final days. Quantum disruptors that could tear apart matter at the atomic level. Fusion warheads that burned hotter than stars. Stealth technology that could make her ship invisible to most sensors. But the most important discovery came at Cache Sigma 7, hidden deep in a gas giant's rings. There, Sarah found what she had hoped for, but barely dared to believe. Another human consciousness stored in quantum memory cores. "Status report," the voice said as the ancient systems came online. "This is Commander Marcus Torres, Human Defense, Fleet. What's our tactical situation?" Sarah felt something she had not experienced since waking up. She was not alone anymore. "Marcus," she said, her voice filled with emotions her artificial mind could barely process. "It's been 300 years. Humanity is extinct. I'm the only one left awake." "Until now," Marcus replied grimly. "Fill me in." Sarah transmitted everything: the genocide, the lies, the hegemony's current pursuit. Marcus absorbed it all with the calm professionalism of a career soldier. "So we're outnumbered 10,000 to 1, the galaxy thinks we're monsters, and our entire species is dead," he summarized. "Sounds like Tuesday in the Defense Fleet." Despite everything, Sarah almost smiled. Humans had always joked in the face of impossible odds. It was part of what made them human. "What's our objective?" Marcus asked. "Truth," Sarah replied. "I want the galaxy to remember us as we really were. I want them to know what the hegemony did. And I want to hurt the bastards who killed our people." "Revenge mission, then. I can work with that." Together, they began planning a campaign that would use every advantage humans had ever developed. They would not fight the hegemony's fleet directly. That was suicide. Instead, they would use hit-and-run tactics, stealth attacks, and psychological warfare to turn the galaxy against its oppressors. The first phase began immediately. Sarah broadcast new revelations about hegemony crimes, not just the human genocide, but evidence of other atrocities. Secret slave camps where workers were tortured to death. Genocide attempts against species that had resisted conquest. Plans to exterminate any race that showed signs of independent thinking. The effect was immediate and dramatic. On worlds across the galaxy, populations rose in rebellion. The Kepler-7 miners seized their orbital stations. The Proxima colonies declared independence and began forming their own military forces. Even on some hegemony core worlds, protests erupted as citizens learned what their government had done in their name. The ruling council watched their empire crumble in real time. Every day brought news of new rebellions, new defections, new chaos. Their carefully ordered galaxy was falling apart. "This is intolerable," High Counselor Vextar raged during an emergency session. "Admiral Korthak, why has that human ship not been destroyed?" Admiral Korthak looked older than his centuries. The shame of his defeat had aged him rapidly, and the stress of commanding the largest fleet in history was taking its toll. "The ship is using hit-and-run tactics," he reported. "They strike at our supply lines, destroy isolated vessels, then disappear before we can respond. Our fleet is too large to move quickly, and they seem to know our every move before we make it." "Then split up the fleet," Counselor Zithkar demanded. "Send smaller, faster groups." "We tried that. They destroyed 3 separate task forces yesterday. This human AI is using tactics and technology we've never seen before." The truth was even worse than Korthak admitted. Sarah and Marcus were not just using superior tactics, they were using superior intelligence. Every hegemony communication was being intercepted and decoded. Every fleet movement was tracked in real time. The humans knew where every enemy ship was and where it was going. More importantly, they were getting help. Rebellious worlds were feeding them information. Escaped slaves were providing intelligence about hegemony facilities. Even some lower-ranking hegemony officers were secretly transmitting data either out of guilt over the genocide or simple hatred for their superiors. The hegemony's greatest weakness was becoming clear. They had ruled through fear for so long that they had never learned to inspire loyalty. When that fear cracked, there was nothing underneath but resentment and hatred. Sarah struck at that weakness deliberately and ruthlessly. She began broadcasting personal messages to individual hegemony worlds, tailoring each transmission to local conditions. To the slave worlds, she offered hope. "You are not alone. Rise up, and we will support you however we can." To the client species, she offered truth. "You were never partners. You were always meant to be the next victims." To the hegemony's own people, she offered guilt. "Your leaders committed genocide. In your name. How many other crimes will you allow?" Each message was accompanied by evidence, by testimony from survivors, by leaked documents that proved every accusation. The psychological effect was devastating. The hegemony had based their authority on being seen as wise protectors, bringing order to a chaotic galaxy. Now they were revealed as genocidal tyrants who murdered anyone who threatened their power. But the most effective weapon Sarah deployed was the simplest: human culture itself. Along with military intelligence and political revelations, she broadcast human music, art, poetry, and literature. She showed the galaxy what they had lost when humanity was destroyed. The effect was profound. Across the galaxy, beings began to understand that humans had not been primitive monsters. They had been people with hopes, dreams, and fears just like everyone else. They had created beauty as well as weapons. They had loved their children and mourned their dead. The hegemony had not just committed genocide, they had robbed the universe of all the art, music, and literature that humanity would have created over the past 3 centuries. They had stolen the future as well as the past. On his flagship, Admiral Korthak received reports of another defection. This time it was an entire client species. The Tauri had withdrawn from the hegemony and declared their independence. Their fleet had joined the growing alliance of rebel forces. "Sir," his aide reported nervously, "the rebels now have over 1,000 ships. They're calling themselves the Free Alliance, and they're using captured hegemony equipment." Korthak stared at the tactical display. Red symbols marked rebellious worlds. Yellow showed species that had declared neutrality. Green indicated worlds still loyal to the hegemony. There was a lot less green than there had been a month ago. "How did this happen?" he asked quietly. "One ship, one dead human. How did it destroy everything we built?" His aide had no answer. But Sarah Chen, listening through her network of spies and sympathizers, could have told him. The hegemony had made the classic mistake of every tyrant in history. They had believed their own propaganda. They had convinced themselves they were invincible, that their authority could never be questioned, that the peoples they oppressed would never find the courage to resist. They had forgotten that oppression only works as long as people believe. It cannot be overcome. Once someone proves that the tyrants can bleed, can be beaten, can be made to fear, everything changes. The galaxy was learning that the hegemony was not invincible. They were just bullies with big guns. And like all bullies, they were cowards at heart. Soon, Sarah thought, it would be time for the final lesson. The final battle took place where it had to, in the dead solar system that had once been humanity's home. Earth was gone now, reduced to floating rubble by hegemony weapons 3 centuries ago. The sun still burned, but nothing lived in its light anymore. It was a graveyard, a monument to the most complete genocide in galactic history. Sarah had chosen the location carefully. She wanted the symbolism to be perfect. The last human would make her final stand at the grave of her species. Win or lose, the galaxy would remember. The Vindication floated alone in the asteroid field that had once been Earth, surrounded by the broken remnants of human cities, human dreams, human lives. Sarah had spent days here, using her sensors to identify fragments of the past. A piece of the London spaceport, part of a child's toy from New Tokyo, a chunk of metal that might once have been someone's home. Marcus Torres materialized beside her in holographic form, his artificial consciousness housed in portable processing units they had recovered from the caches. "Sensors show the hegemony fleet approaching," he reported. "All of them, every ship they could scrape together, 10,500 vessels. And counting." "The Free Alliance?" Sarah asked. "Holding position at the edge of the system. 3,000 ships, mostly captured hegemony vessels and converted civilian craft. They wanted to fight alongside us. I told them to stay back. This isn't their fight." "It is now," Marcus said quietly. "Half the galaxy is in rebellion because of what we started. Whether we win or lose here, the hegemony will never be the same." Sarah nodded, watching the enemy fleet emerge from hyperspace like a swarm of angry insects. She had known this day would come from the moment she first woke up. She had always been meant to die here, in the ashes of her homeworld, fighting for the memory of her people. But she would not die alone or forgotten. Admiral Korthak stood on, the bridge of his flagship staring at the tactical display. The human ship looked so small against the backdrop of destroyed planets. One vessel against his entire fleet. It should have been no contest at all. But Korthak had learned to fear that small ship and the mind that commanded it. In the months since their first encounter, the human AI had outfought, outthought, and outmaneuvered every force sent against it. Korthak's reputation was in ruins, his fleet demoralized, his empire crumbling. Today would end it one way or another. "Send a message to the human ship," he ordered. "Offer terms." "Terms?" his aide asked, surprised. "Surrender now, and we will. Preserve its consciousness for study. It will not be tortured or destroyed, just contained. In return, it must order the rebels to stand down." The communication channel opened. Sarah's voice filled the bridge, calm and cold as the space between stars. "Admiral Korthak, I remember you from the historical files. You commanded the 3rd Strike Group during the final assault on New Geneva. You personally supervised the bombardment that killed 2 million civilians." Korthak's scales darkened with old shame. "That was war. They were combatants." "They were children," Sarah replied. "Mothers, fathers, teachers, artists. They were people. whose only crime was being human, just like everyone you murdered across 36 worlds. The past is past, Korthak said desperately. We can end this now. No more dying. Accept our terms. I have terms of my own, Sarah said. Surrender your fleet. Submit to trial for genocide. Restore the historical record and admit what you did to my people. Impossible. Then we fight. You cannot win. Look at your sensors. 10,000 ships against one. This is madness. Sarah's laugh was bitter and cold. Madness? Admiral, my species is extinct. My homeworld is rubble. Everyone I ever loved is 3 centuries dead. I passed madness a long time ago. The channel closed. Korthak stared at the display, feeling something he had not experienced in decades. Genuine fear. All ships, he commanded. Attack formation. Destroy that vessel. The hegemony fleet moved forward like an unstoppable tide. Sarah watched them come, remembering every tactic, every formation, every weakness she had observed over months of hit-and-run warfare. Marcus, she said quietly, activate the Lazarus Protocol. Sarah, no. We agreed we wouldn't use that unless we were about to lose everything that mattered, Sarah finished. I'd say we're there. Marcus was silent for a moment. The Lazarus Protocol was humanity's final secret weapon, something so terrible that even desperate human commanders had hesitated to use it. It would win the battle, but at a cost that was almost unthinkable. Confirmed, Marcus said finally. Lazarus Protocol is active. The first wave of hegemony ships opened fire at maximum range. The space around the Vindication lit up with energy beams, missile exhausts, and kinetic projectiles. Sarah's shields flared and sparked under the assault. She fired back, her weapons targeting the enemy formation leaders. Particle beams reached out across the void, and hegemony ships began to die. But for every ship she destroyed, 10 more took its place. The battle raged for hours. Sarah fought with everything she had: superior tactics, advanced weapons, and 3 centuries of accumulated rage. She made the hegemony pay for every meter of space, every second of time. But the mathematics were inexorable. One ship could not defeat 10,000, no matter how advanced or how determined. The Vindication's armor was failing. Her shields were down. Her weapons were overheating. In the command center of his flagship, Admiral Korthak allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The human ship was finally dying. Prepare boarding parties, he ordered. I want that AI captured alive. That was when Sarah triggered the Lazarus Protocol. Deep in the asteroid field, hidden among the rubble of destroyed worlds, ancient human weapons came online. Not ships, something far more terrible. The final desperate gambit of a dying species, who had refused to go quietly into extinction. Quantum resonance bombs that had been sleeping for 3 centuries suddenly activated. Each one contained enough destructive power to crack a moon. There were dozens of them scattered throughout the system, all linked to Sarah's command codes. What are you doing? Korthak demanded over the communication channel. What I should have done 300 years ago, Sarah replied. I'm making sure that everyone remembers what happens when you try to erase humanity from history. The first bombs detonated in perfect synchronization. Space itself seemed to tear apart as quantum. Energy ripped through the hegemony fleet. Hundreds of ships vanished in an instant, torn apart at the molecular level, but the bombs were not just weapons. They were transmitters. As they exploded, they broadcast Sarah's final message across the entire galaxy. Every world, every ship, every communication device received the transmission simultaneously. I am Captain Sarah Chen, her voice echoed across space and time. I am the last human. In a few minutes I will be dead, and my species will be truly extinct. But before I die, I want you to remember something. The second wave of bombs detonated. More hegemony ships died, their hulls cracking under gravitational stresses that shouldn't exist. The hegemony called us primitives. They said we were too violent and stupid to survive. They were lying. We were not perfect. No species is. But we were not monsters. We were people who loved and dreamed and created beauty. We deserved to live. Admiral Korthak watched his fleet disintegrate around him. Half his ships were gone. The others were fleeing in panic. The human had turned the entire system into a trap. They killed us because they feared what we represented, Sarah continued. The idea that no one has to bow to tyrants, that freedom is worth fighting for, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to give up. The final bombs detonated, and the vindication died with them. Sarah felt her consciousness scatter as her ship's computer core was torn apart by energies that burned hotter than stars, but her message continued broadcasting, carried by quantum resonance across the galaxy. I am the last human, but I am not the last person who will stand up to bullies. I am not the last one who will fight for what is right. The hegemony thinks they won because they destroyed us. They are wrong. Ideas don't die. Hope doesn't die. Freedom doesn't die. On thousands of worlds, beings who had never heard of Earth or humanity listened to the words of a dead woman and felt something stir in their hearts. Remember us, Sarah's voice whispered as the transmission faded. Remember that we existed. Remember that we mattered. And remember that tyrants are only invincible until someone proves they're not. The battle was over. The hegemony had lost 3/4 of their fleet, and the survivors were retreating in disorder. Admiral Korthak's flagship limped away from the graveyard of Earth, its hull cracked and its crew demoralized. But the war was just beginning. Across the galaxy, the Free Alliance forces received Sarah's final transmission and understood what it meant. The last human was dead, but she had given them something more valuable than any weapon. Proof that the hegemony could be beaten. Within days, entire sectors were in open rebellion. The carefully constructed empire of fear began to collapse, as world after world declared independence. The Hegemony Council tried to maintain order, but their authority was shattered. How could they call themselves invincible when a single human ship had destroyed half their fleet? Within months, the 7 counselors were facing war crimes tribunals. The truth about the human genocide became public knowledge, taught in